Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Madison Scott. Someone actually suggested this case in the comments of my last video, and at the time I hadn't heard of it before, but when I started to look into it, I knew that I had to cover it. So Madison Scott is a Canadian missing person, and she disappeared in May 2011 from a campsite at Hogsback Lake in British Columbia, Canada. This case is really interesting, and there are so many theories about what could have happened to her, and I really do feel like it has the potential to actually be solved one day. But before we get into the case, I just want to say if you find this video interesting, please give it a like and subscribe for more true crime content. So Madison Scott, who often went by Maddie, was born on April 29th, 1991, and she was 20 years old when she went missing. Her parents are named Eldon and Dawn Scott, and Madison was their middle child. So they had 3 children. Madison had a younger sister named Georgia and an older brother named Ben. At the time of her disappearance, Madison was living with her family in Vanderhoof, British Columbia, which is where she lived most of her life. And Madison had lots of friends. She was very popular, and there was actually a documentary done on her disappearance in, I think, 2013. And in that documentary, they interviewed so many of her friends, and they all just had such good things to say about her. And the way that they describe her, it just sounds like she was such an amazing person. It really showed how many friends she had and how much they all loved her and really miss her. She was known for being really funny and goofy and was just such a blast to hang out with. She always wanted to go out and do stuff with her friends. She definitely wasn't a stay-at-home on the couch type of person. And her mother, Dawn Scott, said that she was also very, very intelligent, but that she didn't always apply herself in school because she always prioritized the social aspect of school. She had a lot of interests and hobbies. She really liked dirt biking, horseback riding. It sounds like she was pretty athletic because she also played hockey. She was also really creative. Like in high school, she and a group of friends created these short films together, and Madison apparently really took charge with this. She came up with the ideas, wanted to edit them and direct them, and she just loved the whole creative process around these short films. She also loved camping and the outdoors, and her cousin said that she was always down to try a new activity and was a really outgoing person. Her brother described her as always being the life of the party, and she was the kind of person where you'd see her 1 minute in a dress and then the next she'd be in coveralls changing the oil in her truck, and I just thought that was so cute. She also wasn't somebody to be fake or try to be somebody who she wasn't, and apparently if you didn't like her, she just really didn't care, which I really admire. When she went missing, her friends and family were really shocked that something like this could happen to Maddie because she was such a strong and independent person. But of course, like, this could happen to anybody, right? Maddie graduated high school in 2009, and after that, she worked as an apprentice heavy-duty mechanic with her father at a logging company. Okay, so now let's talk about the day that Maddie went missing. So on Friday, May 27th, 2011, Maddie had a pretty normal day. She had plans to hang out with her cousin, but on the day of, she actually ended up canceling on her cousin because she told her that she wanted to go to a friend's birthday party instead. Her cousin was only supposed to be in town for a short time, and this was really her only opportunity to hang out with Maddie before she went back to school, but still, Maddie canceled on her. Her cousin wasn't upset or anything about this. Apparently, this is really common for Maddie. Like, she was a very spur-of-the-moment, spontaneous person, so it wasn't surprising when she changed the plans last minute. So this birthday party was actually a yearly event thrown by a guy named Garrett at Hogsback Lake. So Hogsback Lake is a camping lake area with a dock that's about 20 kilometers or a 20-minute drive from where Maddie lived in Vanderhoof. It was a really popular place for young people to throw parties because it had a couple of camping areas. It was pretty big and it was really isolated, so they didn't have to worry too much about noise and getting noise complaints. The party was advertised by a Facebook event page, and a couple of Maddie's friends were planning on going, so she decided to tag along. It was reported that about 50 people attended this party, and they were all roughly Maddie's age, so in their 20s. And Maddie had actually planned to camp out there for the night with her old high school friend Jordan, who everyone refers to as Jordy. This was actually a really common thing for people to do when they would party at Hogsback Lake, was to camp there overnight, because then they didn't have to worry about finding a designated driver or driving home drunk or driving home late at night and stuff like that. And on this night, it was in May, so it was a really nice spring evening and good camping weather. And what's interesting, and we'll get into this more later, but Maddie and Jordy had actually not seen each other since high school. They were friends in high school, but by the time they graduated, they weren't really friends anymore and the friendship kind of fizzled out. But apparently they reconnected over this party and decided to go together and camp together in the same tent. And there were a couple other party goers that were planning on camping there overnight, including Garrett, the one that was hosting the party. So on that Friday night, Maddie packed everything that she would need for her camping trip. She got her toiletries, her sleeping bag, her tent, and she also packed a cooler of alcohol to take with her to the party. And if you don't know, the drinking age in Canada is 19. Maddie and Jordy left to head to Hogsback Lake in Maddie's white 1990 Ford F-150 pickup truck around 8 p.m. So they got there and apparently started collecting firewood and then went to set up the tents when Maddie realized that she actually brought the wrong tent poles. So they drove back to Maddie's house to get the right tent poles. And when Maddie returned home, she ran into her mother and explained, like, I goofed up and I brought the wrong tent poles. And they briefly spoke, and her mother noted that Maddie seemed completely normal and like she was in a good mood. And before Maddie left for the second time, her mom spoke to her and just said, have a good time, be safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. And that was the last time that Maddie's mom would see her and speak to her in person, which was around 9:30 p.m. that Friday night. Maddie and Jordy then returned to Hogsback Lake and the party started around 10 p.m. Maddie texted with her mom later in the night. We don't know exactly what they texted about, but the last time her mom heard from her was around 11:30 p.m. when they texted goodnight to each other. So now let's talk about this party and the timeline of events. So many people who attended this party would later recount that Maddie actually spent most of the night in her tent. We don't know exactly why this is. It's pretty strange because she was really excited to go to this party. Like, she brought alcohol with her and she canceled on her cousin, but nobody really knows why she didn't really participate in the party. And witnesses said it wasn't like she drank too much and then was sick in the tent or anything like that. It just seemed like she wasn't really into it and decided to settle in early for the night. Jordy, on the other hand, got very intoxicated and she said that she just drank way too much. People reported that they were having a really good time at this party, but then later on in the night, a group of people showed up that were older, like around 40 years old. As I mentioned before, most people at this party were Maddie's age, so in their 20s. So it was a little strange that some 40-year-olds decided to show up. I wasn't really able to find out much about this crowd. Like, I don't know if someone at the party just had a couple of older friends that they invited or they saw the Facebook page or something like that. But apparently when they showed up, they were really rowdy. Then shortly after these people showed up, Jordy claims that some kind of fight broke out, and in the commotion of this fight, she was actually pushed into the fire and got injured from this. Like, not majorly or anything. I wasn't able to find out what her exact injuries were, but it sounds like it wasn't very serious. And then apparently these people, or whatever fight broke out, just kind of ruined the mood and the vibe of the party, so people started leaving between 1 and 2 a.m. Jordy says at this point she was really drunk and injured from being pushed into the fire that she actually decided that she didn't want to stay at the campsite anymore and just wanted to go home. So she decided to leave with her new boyfriend, his name's Tyler, and she tried to convince Maddie to come with them and that they would drive her home, but apparently Maddie declined. According to Jordy, Maddie was already in her sleeping bag and didn't want to get up, so she and Tyler left Maddie at the campsite and went home. And then the other people, including Garrett, who were supposed to spend the night at the campsite, also decided to go home and kind of cleared out around the same time that Jordy did. And then the last group of guys at the party actually stopped by Maddie's tent on their way out and asked her if she wanted a ride. And again, she declined and just said that she wanted to stay at the campsite. So that means that Maddie was actually left alone at the campsite because everyone else had cleared out, and those guys were the last people to see Maddie, and that was around 3 a.m. Saturday morning. And then around 8:30 a.m. later that Saturday morning, Jordy and her boyfriend actually returned to the campsite to collect her belongings. Apparently she wanted to get her clothes, sleeping bag, and pillow on her way to work. So this just shows whatever happened with the fire definitely wasn't that serious because she went to work the next day. When she got to the campsite, Maddie's tent was actually unzipped and inside the tent, her sleeping bag and all her stuff was just pushed to one side of the tent. And she said that she didn't see Maddie anywhere on the campsite. In one interview that Jordy did, she claimed that the reason she went back to the campsite was to check on Maddie, but no one really believes that because she went there and didn't see Maddie anywhere, and the tent was unzipped, and she just didn't do anything with that. She didn't try to call Maddie, she didn't call her mother, and she didn't report it to anyone. She just went on to work, which I think is pretty weird. I don't know how anyone could not find that worrisome. Like, you left your friend at a campsite overnight alone, and then you come back the next morning and they aren't there. The only thing I can think of is maybe she was like hungover or in a rush to get to work. And then later that morning around 10:30 a.m., Garrett, the one who hosted the party, returned to Hogsback Lake to clean up the area. He said that he saw Maddie's truck and her tent, and that the tent was zipped up. He didn't check on her or anything because he assumed that she was sleeping inside of it, which I feel like that's reasonable because it was only 10:30 a.m. And I don't think this was confirmed anywhere, but I think the tent was zipped up because Jordy, on her way out after grabbing her sleeping bag and everything, zipped it back up. And then Saturday just went on and her parents actually didn't hear from her, even by nighttime. Apparently they tried to call her, but her phone just kept going straight to voicemail. Some of her friends had also tried to contact her, but they also just got her voicemail. Maddie's parents were not worried about it at that point because they knew that the cell service at Hogsback Lake was really spotty, and they also knew that she had a bunch of plans that weekend and just assumed that she wanted to stay out another night. And Maddie was an adult, right? She was 20 years old and very responsible. So her mother thought if she just wanted to stay out another night, that was totally fine. Then later on Saturday night, there was another party at Hogsback Lake. This one was much bigger, around 150 people, and the crowd was a lot younger, like younger teenagers. Maddie's younger sister was actually at this party, and a lot of people at the party said that they saw Maddie's truck and tent at the campsite, but they didn't see her. Maddie's sister didn't think there was anything wrong with this. She just assumed that she left her stuff there and then went to party somewhere else. Then there was this 17-year-old kid at this Saturday night party who decided that it would be a funny joke to flatten Maddie's tent. I guess he didn't know it was Maddie's tent at the time, but he just kind of wanted to play a prank on the person so that when they came back to their tent, they'd have to like re-pitch it. Police questioned this kid a lot, but they were able to determine that he was just trying to pull a joke on someone. Okay, so now we're at Sunday morning and Maddie's parents still haven't heard from her. It's been 2 days. Her phone is still going straight to voicemail and they're starting to get worried. Dawn, who's Maddie's mother, decided to call Jordy's house. She spoke with Jordy and Jordy's mother and found out that Jordy had actually been home since Saturday morning and didn't end up spending the night with Maddie. And that's when Maddie's parents decided that they needed to head out to Hogsback Lake to find out what's going on. And when they got there, they found Maddie's truck, which was locked, her tent, and all her belongings, but no sign of Maddie. The tent was collapsed with all of her stuff in it because that kid flattened it, and her truck still had her purse in it and all of this expensive dirtbag equipment in the back of her pickup truck, along with the cooler that still had some alcohol in it. So they started to look around the campsite and realized there was actually people camping in the neighboring campsite. And they told her parents that they hadn't seen Maddie the entire time they had been there, which was since Saturday morning, but that her truck and tent had been there the entire time. Her father then wandered the trails around the campsite, but there was no sign of her. And that's when they decided to go ahead and call the police to report her disappearance.
RCMP. Hi, I'm calling. My daughter's 20. We're at Hogsback, and I haven't heard from her since Friday night. And we just came out, and our pickup is here in the vehicle, and people haven't seen her at all.
Okay, what's her name?
Madison Scott.
And what's her date of birth?
April 29th, 91.
So she was last heard from on Friday?
Friday night, yes.
Okay.
All of her stuff's here, but yeah, I don't know.
Where does she live? With you?
Yes, with us in Vanderhoof.
Okay, so now let's talk about the investigation into her disappearance, which was huge. Like, it was the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that were running with this case, and at no point did they not take it seriously, and they didn't give the family any of that "maybe she ran away" crap. So the first thing that the police did was track down everybody who went to that party on Friday night, and luckily the Facebook group actually made it pretty easy to track down all these people. And again, it was around 50 people who attended that party. And they were also able to track down almost everyone who attended the Saturday night party, which was about 150 people. And then through extensive interviews, they were able to nail down a timeline of what happened on Friday and Saturday night. The police reported that everyone who was at the party on Friday night and the party on Saturday night were really cooperative, and everybody agreed to take a polygraph test. Jordy reported that she took many tests and passed them all, and apparently one of her tests, they told her that she aced it. One thing to note is that polygraph tests aren't actually admissible in Canadian criminal court, so it's not 100% clear why police gave all these people polygraph tests. It was probably just to put pressure on the partygoers to maybe get them to give out more information or even confess. And then the police were able to conclude that they had no reason to suspect that anybody at the party was responsible for the disappearance. However, polygraph tests are not the most reliable, so a lot of people were really upset that all these people were just ruled out because they passed a polygraph test. The police also conducted forensic testing on all of Maddie's belongings from the campsite, so her truck, her sleeping bag, her pillow, all of her clothes, and they didn't find anything. The police also collected Jordy's belongings and tested her sleeping bag and her pillow. And apparently Jordy had actually thrown her pillow in the wash already, but she didn't wash her sleeping bag. And they didn't find anything on Maddie's belongings, but they did find blood on Jordy's sleeping bag. She was questioned about this blood and was able to clear any suspicion around this by explaining that it was actually an ankle injury that she had gotten the last time she used the sleeping bag, which was years ago, and she just never washed it. The police also noted that there was no sign of a struggle at the campsite and that all of her belongings seemed to still be there, so there was no element of robbery in this disappearance. And this is important, but the only things that were missing were her phone and her keys. So officers believed that those items were with Maddie when she disappeared. And what's such a shame is because of that party on Saturday night, all those people were actually trampling all over the crime scene and destroyed any evidence that would have been there. But remember, before the second party even happened, both Jordy and Garrett returned to the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The Scott family also hired a private investigator to do their own interview with Jordy, and they reported back to the Scotts that Jordy just kept asking to have her favorite pillow back. Which is definitely kind of weird, like your friend's missing. Can you forget about your pillow? But you always have to keep in mind that people deal with grief differently. Right after her disappearance, there was a very extensive search of the Hogsback Lake and the surrounding areas. And the RCMP actually used more investigative tools than in any other case in BC history. The lake, creeks, swamps, forests, every single trail was searched just looking for any sign of Maddie or her belongings. Remember, her keys and her phone weren't found at the campsite. The area had been searched by foot, horseback, boat, truck, cadaver dogs, as well as a helicopter using forward infrared technology, which is basically like a thermal camera. Cadaver dogs and dive teams also thoroughly searched the lake. The lake is about 128 acres in size and only 22 feet at its deepest point with clear water. So it wasn't that big of a lake or a particularly difficult one, so they did search the entire thing. There was also a boat search of the lake with sonar, so they did a very thorough search of the lake. There was a particularly extensive search done in the initial days right after the disappearance, with search crews actually working all day until 10 at night. The search was actually really difficult because of the terrain of the forests and trails near Hogsback Lake. Apparently it was really rigid and rough, and there were a bunch of collapsed trees and boulders, hills, and it was very dense, like you couldn't really see very far at a distance. There were also a lot of off-the-grid cabins in the area, and they searched all of those as well. So many days after intense searching, the RCMP actually called off the search, and they just said there was no way that Maddie was still in the area. And the community support in this case is just insane. Like, it's so good to see so many people of the community volunteered to go search at Hogsback Lake. People were taking days off work and using their vacation days to go help the police search for Maddie, and they also searched even after the RCMP had called off their search. And many people just did searches on their own time. Like, they went out on their ATVs or motorcycles or their boats and just searched on their own. And in the documentary that I mentioned before, they had this man on there who, as soon as he heard the news, he got in his boat and immediately went out on the lake to see if he could find anything helpful. But still, after all that searching, there was no sign of Maddie anywhere, and the family and the police are pretty confident that she's not in that area. Also, the family's awareness efforts just go above and beyond, even to this day, like even more than 10 years after her disappearance. Maddie's family and friends immediately started giving everything they had to get her picture and the story out to the media. They wanted as many people as possible to know about Maddie and what she looked like and who to contact with any information. They organized mass distribution of posters, pens, bumper stickers, and signs. And apparently to this day, you still can't drive in Vanderhoof or some of the neighboring towns without seeing one of the bumper stickers or signs with Maddie's picture on it. They also wanted the public to know what her belongings looked like in case they were ever found. Her phone was an iPhone 4 in a robin's blue egg case, and her keys were a large cluster of keys with a Ford key on a Gothic style lanyard. Maddie herself also had a unique identifier, and that was a tattoo of a dove on her wrist that she had gotten only a month before her disappearance. Currently, there is an advertised $100,000 reward for anyone sharing information leading to an arrest for whoever took Maddie. And there were a couple of documentaries made on Maddie's disappearance, so that also helped with awareness. Also, there is a poker ride put on every year to raise awareness for the disappearance, where people bring ATVs, horses, and they walk the trails at Hogsback Lake just to kind of keep her memory alive. And they do this every year, and it's so nice for the family to see that even many years later, dozens and dozens of people still come out for this poker ride and they still care about Maddie. So in terms of people of interest, the police reported that they haven't been able to identify anybody who would have had a grudge or want to harm Maddie. But there are a couple things to note about the interactions she had the night of the party. There was a guy who she was interested in who was at the party, but apparently he turned her down that night and told her that he just wanted to be friends. According to Maddie's parents, she was a bit upset about this, but nothing major, like she wasn't heartbroken or anything. It's not 100% clear how her parents knew that this interaction took place, but I think that that's what they were texting about that night. And it's not known if there was any extra investigation done into this guy that she was interested in. And there was another guy who was actually interested in Maddie, but she was not interested in him. According to witnesses, after she turned him down, he got a bit huffy, but only in private to a couple of people, not like a public display. He wasn't outraged or anything. And this guy was heavily questioned by police, but they were able to rule out that he wasn't involved in her disappearance. Police also pulled Maddie's phone records and saw that she had an incoming call from someone at 12:30 a.m. the night of the party. And Dawn described the caller as a young boy who we know. And there isn't really any other information on the call or who this guy actually was. So now let's talk about what possibly could have happened to Maddie on that night. So the police have stated this, and it's pretty obvious that foul play is definitely involved. The police believe that Maddie left the campsite in the early morning hours of the night of the party and then was met with foul play. They believe that she left by car with someone, as there was no evidence that she left on foot. And Maddie's mother has stated that she doesn't believe that Maddie would have stayed alone at the campsite. And I can totally understand that. Like, that would be really scary, being alone in the woods overnight. And since there was no sign of a struggle and Maddie had enough time to grab her phone and keys before she left, it makes you think that she just left at her own will. Like, if there was a struggle and someone jumped the tent, she wouldn't have had time to grab her phone and keys necessarily. Like, the fact that she did grab her keys means that she probably thought she was going home and needed her keys to get into her house. So who did she leave with? Someone police looked into was named Furban Bjorson. So after Maddie's disappearance, a rumor started spreading that this Bjorson guy was actually involved in Maddie's disappearance. This rumor started after Jordy gave an interview with 48 Hours and said in that interview that Maddie and Bjorson were romantically involved and that he was bad news. He was a 28-year-old man and apparently was just kind of living a sketchy lifestyle and was into drugs and stuff like that. And the rumor was that Maddie and him were seeing each other, and some drug dealers that he owed money to actually took Maddie as punishment for not paying his debts. However, Maddie's mother says that they definitely were not involved. Apparently they did know each other and they were acquaintances because they played on the same softball team in the past, but there wasn't anything more to it than that. But this rumor really had the public fired up that the police actually ended up interviewing Bjorsen. He told them he absolutely had nothing to do with Maddie's disappearance and they weren't seeing each other, and he took a polygraph test and passed. But then 2 days after his interview, he actually went missing. And people went crazy over this. They were saying that this proved that he was involved because he fled and thought the police were onto him. And then a couple weeks later, his decapitated head was found in a neighboring town. The police were able to tie 4 people and arrest them for his murder. And I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it was drug related. And after investigating, the families and police can confidently say that the cases are not related. And it was determined to just be a rumor, and there was no truth to his connection to Maddie's disappearance. Although it's still kind of suspicious, like why would Jordy even say that? The next theory is that one of Jordy's friends or acquaintances that were at the party had something to do with her disappearance. Many people have pointed fingers towards Jordy as possibly having something to do with the disappearance. Since she was supposed to spend the night with Maddie and they didn't really know each other anymore when they reconnected and decided to go to this party, it's just natural to suspect her. Also, Jordy apparently changed her story a couple times in interviews that she did that were televised, and then also interviews she had with the police. She said that they gathered firewood and then they set up the tents, but then another interview, those things happened in the reversed order. And then the whole thing about what happened with the fire was kind of weird. There were some interviews where she said she fell into the fire, and then there were some where she just fell beside the fire, and she doesn't really stay consistent with what her injuries were. And then there's that whole she went back to check on Maddie thing, which is kind of weird because she clearly didn't go there for that because Maddie wasn't there and she didn't do anything about it. But I think it's widely believed that the only reason why she said that is she feels really guilty for leaving Maddie that night. So there are a couple weird things about Jordy. However, she did take many polygraph tests and no deception was ever detected. And the logistics of how she would have pulled this off are kind of complex. Like, she left with her boyfriend and then she'd have to find a way to get back to the campsite. Or maybe she conspired with another person at the party, but then again, everybody took polygraph tests. But that makes you think maybe her boyfriend was involved, and it's actually not known how much time and effort was spent investigating her boyfriend, who was named Tyler. I do think it is pretty weird that they went back to the campsite so early the next morning. It kind of makes me think they were trying to get rid of evidence or something. And it's also weird that Maddie was in her tent the whole night. It makes you think that maybe she was upset with Jordy or they got into an argument and Jordy just doesn't want to admit that to the police. But of course that's just speculation, and I'm sure she feels really guilty about leaving Maddie behind. But if Maddie was in her tent all night, it makes you wonder who else possibly could have upset her. My mind goes to that guy that she apparently turned down. Maybe he was a lot more mad about this than he let on. But then again, apparently the police put him through a ringer and they don't think he was involved. And even though the police couldn't find any evidence that anyone at the party was involved, it really does just make the most sense. I think the most likely situation was that someone offered to give her a ride home and she realized that everyone else had left by that point and she went with them. And this is why I think this case definitely has potential to be solved, because one or more people that were at that party definitely know more than they've said, and hopefully one day they will come forward. Another theory is that it was a stranger and not anyone that has ever been considered, and that it was a crime of opportunity. Maddie's campsite was the first one as soon as you entered the kind of camping area. Maybe someone saw the Facebook group and decided to show up to the party, and when they got there, they saw Maddie's tent alone or something like that and decided to do something to Maddie. But this theory is not the most convincing because there was no sign of a struggle. The last theory that I'm going to talk about is that Maddie was one of the victims of the Highway of Tears. But first I want to say that the family definitely does not like this theory, and they fought really hard to keep her name off the list of suspected victims. It's not really clear why, but I'll give my thoughts after I explain what it is. So if you don't know what the Highway of Tears is, it's a 450-mile stretch of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert in BC, Canada. And it has been the location for many, many disappearances and murders starting in 1970. And the majority of the victims are Indigenous women. The list of victims is like 80 plus long, but actually a lot of those victims are only suspected. And it's really hard to tell how many victims there actually are of the Highway of Tears. Some remains have been discovered along Highway 16, while others were just last seen hitchhiking on Highway 16. And it's a really weird phenomenon. Like, there's so many theories and conspiracy theories about kind of what's going on there. But I think most experts believe it's a combination of poverty around that area, and then that results in a lot more people hitchhiking, and then also the fact that it's very secluded. Anyway, this theory was really pushed by the media that Maddie disappeared as part of the Highway of Tears. And the reason for this is there are two victims of the Highway of Tears. Their disappearances had similar circumstances to Maddie's. The first is a woman named Bonnie Joseph, and Bonnie was last seen hitchhiking in Vanderhoof. That's the only similarity. That's it with that one. And the next is Anita Thorne. Anita's purse was found in her car, and her phone and keys were among the belongings that went missing with her. Anita went missing in Prince George, and her car was found abandoned in Prince George. Which, yeah, like, that's kind of similar to Maddie's disappearance, but I do think it's a bit of a stretch because Hogsback Lake is actually a 3+ hour walk from Highway 16. There's literally no reason or evidence that Maddie would walk to Highway 16 and then hitchhike. And I was really surprised to find out that Maddie's name is actually on the list of victims of one of the main websites used to track the victims of the Highway of Tears. I think the family doesn't like this theory because they probably think it distracts from some of the way more convincing possibilities of what happened to Maddie. And it's just a waste of time. Like, there's no evidence to suggest that she would want to walk to Highway 16 and then hitchhike. She had a working car, a cell phone, and I'm sure she would have stumbled upon someone who could have helped her before the 3-hour walk to Highway 16. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for today. I'll leave the link to the Madison Scott website that her parents run in the description below, along with their Facebook page where they share updates and stuff. And I'll also link the documentary that I mentioned earlier. I really hope that this case gets solved one day. As I said before, I really think that with time, someone will eventually come forward with information about her disappearance. Please leave your thoughts and theories on this case in the comments below, and let me know if you found this video interesting. Also, feel free to leave case suggestions in the comments. Thanks to the person who suggested this case. See you next time, guys. Bye.